The Case of Nicol, Season 1, written by Cornell L.H., narrated by Adam Whitty. Episode 2, The Escalation, 9th of June. The next day, it was about 9:30 when Jason was in the kitchen checking out the mail. Nicol was there with him, having a cup of tea while she was reading the paper. They sat peacefully opposite each other when he came across a plain envelope. It had no stamps, address, or sender, just a simple white envelope. "This is not right," he mumbled under his nose while examining it. He thought it was another leaflet, and he opened it just to look in case before it ended up in the bin. To his surprise, it was something else. The letter was for him, and what he was reading took his breath. "What is it?" Nicol asked, when she saw her husband's face turn stern. "We should call Detective Price." "Just don't worry, babe," Jason said, while he tried to control his anger and looked for his phone. "You're bugging me out. What is that? Tell me, please, or let me see." "Just don't worry about it. Let me call the detective. He told us to call him if something happens." "Okay, now I'm definitely freaking out. You have to tell me, what is that?" Nicol demanded. "It isn't for you. It's for me." They both stopped talking and sat there, confused for a moment. Nicol looked at Jason with a type of fear in her eyes which he had never seen before, and asked, "If it's for you, why must we call the detective?" "Because it's about you," Jason said, as calmly as he could, and took Nicol's hand. "But I don't want to scare you. This guy's off his head and talking nonsense." He stood up and went to get Price's card. He was pacing up and down in the kitchen before Price picked up the phone. "Detective Price, Metropolitan Police, how can I help?" he said. "Hello, Detective. I'm Jason Dallas, Detective Haver's friend. You came to see us yesterday with him." "Yes, Mr. Dallas, what's happened?" "We have received a letter today. I think it's from that bastard who is after my wife." "What makes you think this, Mr. Dallas?" "It is about my wife, addressed to me, with no sender, nothing." "Okay, sir, please try to preserve it. It could have fingerprints or DNA from the suspect. I'm on my way now. Wait for me at your home, please." "Yes, of course. Thank you, Detective. I will see you soon." When Jason finished the call and turned around, Nicol already had the letter. Jason gently took it away and made Nicol sit down. He kneeled in front of her with her hand in his. She held her other hand in front of her lips, crying her eyes out. "Please, Nicol, look at me," he said while trying to catch eye contact. "All those things that letter says, it's only some psycho blah blah. You know I would never do anything like that. You know it, babe, and you know I love you." No matter how hard Jason tried, he could not calm his wife. She was still in tears when the detective arrived. Nicol was in shock. She could not believe that something like this could ever happen to her. People usually see things happen to others, but for Nicol, it was reality. A mentally disturbed killer was after her. Only the thought of it sent shivers down her spine, and she had difficulty controlling her emotions. Jason never saw her like this, and was determined to help his wife at any price. He was willing to end the man himself, if it came down to that. About 20 minutes went by when the doorbell went off. The young detective had arrived carrying a big bag. Jason opened the door and led him to the kitchen. The letter was there in the middle of the table, already opened. Price explained to Jason and Nicol that he needed their fingerprints since they touched the letter. That's why he brought the bag. It contained the equipment to take the fingerprints and pack the letter as evidence. After they finished with the prints, Detective Price sat down with Nicol and Jason to talk about what they had to do next. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Dallas," he started to say, "I would like you to change your location for some time, if possible. This man knows your home and work address, and knows your husband." "We have to leave our home?" Nicol asked as she fought her tears. "Only for a while, madam," the detective replied. "The sooner I catch him, the sooner you can return to your life. So do you have anywhere to go for a while?" "Yes," Jason answered. "My brother is overseas, and I can ask him to let us use his house because he won't be back until October." "Where is it located?" Price asked. "Bagshot near Ascot. It's a village outside London." "That is good," Price reacted. "Don't notify anyone about it. Just go." "Okay, sir, I better start packing," Jason said, as he stood up to go upstairs and turn his words into action. Nicol looked at Detective Price and asked, "What do you think, sir? Can you catch this man before it's too late?" "I will, Mrs. Dallas," the young detective answered with true confidence in his voice. "I'm sure you will be fine, and I will wait while you pack what you need and follow you out of town so I can make sure no one else does." "Thank you, detective," she said while getting up from her seat. But a little past halfway, she felt like all power had left her body. She fell to the floor. Price was a trained first aider, so he started to apply his knowledge and shouted out to get Jason's attention. "Hey, Mr. Dallas, call 999 and get an ambulance. Your wife just fainted." Jason heard the detective and was running downstairs as he was calling the emergency services. He was by his wife's side in seconds. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, during which Jason never left Nicol for a second. He was kneeling next to her, holding her hand, as she was on the floor unconscious. The paramedics decided to take her to the nearest hospital, St. Mary's. They were saying that she needed further examination to find out what could have been the reason for her condition. The detective gave Jason a lift to the hospital and grabbed the opportunity to talk to him quickly. "Look, Mr. Dallas, you should not tell anybody what just happened. Only you, your wife, and I know where you are now. You should still go to your brother's house once your wife is cleared to leave." "I hope you'll get the guy by then," Jason responded. "Me too, but for now, I want to be careful. I want to get ahead of the suspect, and the letter he just sent you will help us catch him. I will take it to the forensics lab to see what we can find out. Also, I would like you to update me on your wife's condition. I need to know if she needs to stay under medical care for longer. In that scenario, I would request a protective detail to ensure she is safe." "Okay, sir. I will tell you what is happening as soon as I know it myself. I only ask that you please catch this bastard ASAP. I want my wife to be the same old happy being as before this bullshit. Sorry for my language, but it's hard to keep my cool when some crazy killer is after my wife." "I know, sir. It's fine. I don't like these people myself. Assholes like this made me become a detective. There's one more thing, sir. I will send a couple of uniformed officers to look after you tonight if your wife has to stay in the hospital." When they arrived at the hospital, Jason went to find his wife. The nurses pointed him in the right direction. When he saw her, Nicol was already awake. Jason was relieved when the doctors told them that it wasn't significant, only the stress took its toll on her. Besides this, she had to stay for the night to ensure no other issue was present with her health. Jason called the detective to inform him about the situation and said he would stay with her until she could leave. No man or God could have moved him from his wife's bedside. Jason was concerned about Nicol's safety, even with the police guarding the hall. He tried to comfort her in any way he could. He knew she needed him more than ever. After a while, Nicol fell asleep, and Jason nodded off in the car. In the middle of the night, Nicol woke up. She was very thirsty, so she tried to wake Jason up. Nicol went to call out for him, but could not say a word or move a muscle either. She began to be scared. Fear slowly overwhelmed her. She didn't understand what was happening to her. Suddenly, the door of the room opened. She could not see who was coming in and thought it was a nurse. It was dark inside the room, and the light from the corridor was coming from behind the person, so it wasn't possible to see who it was until they came closer. Nicol's eyes adjusted to the conditions in a few seconds. When she saw who was entering, her whole body started to shake. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't make a sound. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move her limbs, which felt heavy. It was the stalker. The black hooded figure was slowly walking up to her bed. Her only thought was that she would die, and nothing could stop it. The person managed to pass 2 police officers. She hoped Jason would wake up, but he sat motionless in the chair. The dark intruder moved without a sound and stood next to her bed. He reached under his coat and pulled out a large knife and lifted it high and struck down towards her chest. The next minute, Nicol woke up screaming and lashing out in every direction in her hospital bed. Jason jumped up straight away and tried to calm her down. "It's okay, babe. It was just a dream. I'm here. I won't leave you." Nicol broke into tears. Shivers of fear ran through her body. Jason was terrified to see his wife this frightened. He felt so useless. He wanted to help so badly, but did not know how. She could not talk, only kept crying. The nurses heard the noise and came to see what was happening. Nicol was in a state of shock. The nurse had seen her condition and shown her some breathing techniques to help her calm down. When she was sleeping once more, Jason could not rest. He was sitting next to her wife's bed, watching over her. Jason remembered when their biggest problem was choosing the right colour for the living room. He realised his wife would never be the same again, even after it ended. In the meantime, Detective Price was back at the yard. As he had told Jason, he handed the letter to the forensic lab. He waited at his desk while they ran various tests, but had no groundbreaking results. There were no traces of DNA or fingerprints. There were no clues, nothing from the letter and its content, nor the escape rope from Nicol's office. The person who wrote the letter ensured no traces of evidence were left behind. Price did not give up that easily. He focused his attention on the letter. He started to analyse every word, every sentence. He was trying to get a glimpse of the personality of the stalker. He placed the letter on his table and took the voice recorder from his bag to create notes. Now he had the time to read it more than once. It was a short letter, printed on an A4 page. The person who wrote it used ordinary paper with an even more common ink. It gave away only what the stalker wanted anyone to know. Dear Mr. Dallas, understandably, believing what is about to be shared with you is hard. First and most, you must know there is no pleasure in the mission, but it has to be done. It has become more complicated since you involved the police, but this will not stop what is inevitable. The mission is not to take a life, but to save billions. Now you wonder how the death of your wife Nicol could be the key to that, and the answer for you is beyond belief. For you, that is enough to know. There will be signs showing that she got consumed by evil. You will see them, Mr. Dallas, and when you do, you must do what has to be done. Save our world. If you want this nightmare to stop, you must take action in your hands. You have to kill your wife, Mr. Dallas, to save us all. If you cannot do that, let the chosen finish the mission. Naturally, this is difficult for you, but with God's help, you will do the right thing. Price was staring at the piece of paper for some time. After a few minutes, he lifted his voice recorder and started to turn his thoughts into words. The content of the letter indicates that Mrs. Dallas is the main target of the suspect. The offender seems to have a general knowledge about Mr. and Mrs. Dallas. It leads to the conclusion that this suspect was watching the couple. The behaviour and the description suggests that the suspect is a male in his late 30s to early 40s. The forensic countermeasures indicate an organised person. His supposed mission drives him. He doesn't go into details about it, but he mentions saving the world. He sees Mrs. Dallas as a source of evil. The reference to the help of God suggests that the suspect's beliefs are rooted in Christianism. I believe this person has some form of mental disorder. He might have been in a mental institution in the past. After finishing his notes, he filed the letter into the evidence list of his case and started to study Nicol's personal history. He found something he wasn't sure if Jason or even Nicol knew. Part of her birth records were unclear. Her date of birth was the 21st of June 1986. However, there were no records of her mother getting admitted to any hospital. It indicated that Nicol was adopted. It was relevant to the case because it could have been why this man chose her for his murderous mission. It was significant indeed. Price had to suspend a case a few months ago. An unknown killer carried out a string of murders. The victims were born at the 1986 summer solstice on the 21st of June. They had one more thing in common. All of them were adopted, with no records of the birth mother. The suspect left no trace. It is pretty impossible in London, with a CCTV network all over the city. Yet again, this guy managed to execute 4 murders in 2 months, and then went quiet. When Price had seen the possible connection, he was stunned for a second. That would have meant that the serial killer, whom Price was after beforehand, and Mrs. Dallas' stalker, were the same person. If that was true, the case had to reopen, because Nicol was part of it. Price knew he had to talk to Nicol and Jason, so he decided to go to the hospital and see them. There was no time to waste, since an innocent life was at stake. He arrived at the hospital around 7:30. He parked in the hospital's car park and headed to the reception. After identifying himself, the nurses told him where Nicol was staying. On the second floor, room 41, is the observation unit. Price went up with the elevator, and as he got out, he followed the signs through a maze of corridors to find the Dallas couple. After a right turn, he found Nicol's room and saw the 2 officers outside the room. It was almost in the middle of a long corridor. The detective was walking towards the officers when someone appeared at the other end of the hall. The man was wearing black clothes with a hood over his head. Both Price and the man stopped when they looked at each other. It can't be, Price thought, but before he could react to the situation or look at his face, the man turned around and started to walk away. Price speeded up his steps to catch up with him and shouted to the man holding his badge, "Excuse me, sir, can I talk to you?" The 2 officers had seen the detective and turned to look at the man he was talking to. The hooded stranger paused for a split second and began to run. Price engaged in a pursuit, joined by one of the 2 officers. The other policeman stayed behind to secure Nicol and Jason. The man was running through the hospital, pushing everyone and everything out of his way to shake off the police, but Price managed to keep up at every turn. They were storming through an X-ray waiting area when the officer collided with a patient coming out of the X-ray room. They both fell on the floor, but the detective was still in chase of the hooded suspect. He turned left after the waiting area and sprinted down a long corridor. Price was about 10 metres behind him. At the end of it, the mysterious runner turned right. The detective did the same, but this time the stranger was waiting around the corner, and when Price took the turn, the man punched him. The inspector didn't see it coming, and the blow knocked him down. However, it didn't knock him out, but he couldn't get back up fast enough to see which way his attacker was gone. He felt dizzy, and his nose was bleeding. A doctor who peeked out of his office to see what happened came to Detective Price's aid. Price showed his credentials to the doctor. "Please take me to the main reception, doctor." "Miller, my name's Dr. Miller, sir. And as a doctor, I would like to advise you to get that nose checked," said the doctor calmly. Price couldn't find his footing, so the doctor helped him in his office and made him sit down. "Look," the doctor said, "I think you have concussion." "That bastard got away," Price kept repeating. Then he turned to Dr. Miller. "Sorry, doctor. Could you contact someone at the observation unit?" "Oh yes, your colleagues are there," the doctor remembered. And he picked up the phone. "Let me give them a call to send one of your officers here." "Thank you, Dr. Miller." After finishing the call, Dr. Miller helped Price stop the bleeding on his nose. He had the detective cleaned up before an officer stepped through the door. He was a member of the backup team who had just arrived. "Detective Price?" he asked. "That's me," said the detective, while he held up his badge. "The victims are secured, sir, but there's no sign of the suspect. How do you want to proceed?" "I would like you to speak to security and see what we can get from the CCTV. The suspect is already 5 minutes ahead of us, so we must find where he exited the hospital to pick up his trail." "Yes, sir." The policeman turned around to leave, but Price stopped him. "Officer, I will join you in the CCTV operator's room." But this bastard cracked my nose, so I let Dr. Miller look at it. "One more reason to catch him, sir," he replied and left. About 10 minutes later, Price was in the CCTV operator's office, where the police officer he sent ahead reported what he found out. "The suspect entered the hospital through the main door about 90 seconds after you, sir. The hood was already on his head, and he didn't look up. Without talking to anyone, he went to Mr. Dallas's location, using the stairs to get to the right floor. That is how you arrived at the opposite ends of the corridor. Of course, the whole chase got recorded, and after he hit you in the face, he ran down another staircase and exited the hospital via the A&E entrance. He sprinted across the car park and turned toward Paddington Underground." "Thank you, officer." Price expressed his gratitude. "Good job, but I'm afraid he would be out of this area by now if he went for the train. I almost had him." "If it's any consolation, sir," the policeman said, "you can take a punch." "Thanks. There should be a second round. This guy is on a mission, and he will be back." After watching the video footage, the young detective went to Nicol's room to speak with Nicol and Jason about what should happen next to ensure Nicol's safety. On the way, he thought about what had just happened. How is it possible that the attacker knew where she was? He must have been watching all along. When he stepped into Nicol's room, she was lying on the bed, with Jason sitting at her bedside on a chair. When Price entered the room, Jason stood up and asked, "What the hell just happened, detective?" "We almost had him," Price answered calmly. "But this guy isn't afraid to attack police officers. He jumped me to get away." "Look, sir," Jason said, while looking deep into Price's eyes to state further that he meant every word. "This asshole is capable of doing anything, but make no mistake, I am too, to protect my wife." And as he was carrying on, Jason's voice started to rise. "So just let him come to me, and I will rip him apart myself." "I understand your anger, sir," Price said, as he tried to calm Jason But our emotions cannot carry us away. This suspect is intelligent, systematic, and driven by his mission, so we must stay sharp." "All right, sir," Jason reacted. "You are right. What should we do next?" "I will get your wife checked out by a doctor, and if she's fine, we will take you and her to your brother's house as planned. We scared the bastard away for now, so he's not watching right now. Therefore, we have to act fast for your safety." "Okay, Detective," Jason answered. "I will stay with Nicol while you set things in motion." While Jason and the detective talked, Nicol was lying there, quietly staring into nothingness. Her body was in the room, but her mind seemed to be in another universe. The other night, that sad feeling from her dreams started to amplify in her, and she couldn't fight it anymore. After the detective left, Jason called her name 2 or 3 times before she reacted. "Yes, my love," Nicol whispered. "Are you okay, babe?" "Yes, I just feel a bit lightheaded," Nicol said, and she sat on her bed to show her strength. "I think it's just the pills that the doctors gave me." "Don't worry, we'll get out of here soon." As Jason finished that sentence, a doctor entered the room to evaluate Nicol's condition. She was good to go, so she got dressed. As Nicol sorted her hair, she looked in the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "This city is full of crazy people, and I don't want to be one of them." The detective and 2 officers were waiting outside the room. When Nicol was ready, they went to the car park through the hospital's back doors and service areas. Nicol and Jason sat in the inspector's car, and the 2 officers followed them in another unmarked car. They took a tactically planned route out of the city to ensure no one was following them. On the way, none of them broke the silence. Jason and Nicol were in the back seat. Jason had fallen asleep while Nicol was gazing out of the window. She was still trying to figure out why she was the target. "Why me?" she was thinking. "What is going through this man's head? I'm no one. I'm a nobody. So how does my death save the world?" Finally, Price was the first to speak before they arrived in Bagshot. "I think we'll be there in a few minutes, madam. Could you wake up Mr. Dallas, please?" he said to Nicol. She gently woke her husband, but as he looked around, he immediately understood that they were near his brother's house. Now, Price had both of his passengers' attention. He explained to Nicol and Jason what would happen to them until the stalker was caught. "I would like to go through with you," he began, "what I need you to do to maintain your safety. The 2 officers will always be with you at the house, and if you need to go shopping or do things like that, at least 1 officer should be with you. Also, I would like to talk to your family, Mrs. Dallas. It could help me understand why you were the target." "That's fine," Nicol answered. "I will call them." "I'd be grateful for that," Price replied, "but please don't tell them where you are staying." "Okay. Thank you." In the meantime, they had arrived at the house. It was a 2-floor house in a quiet close near the railway station. Nicol, Jason, and the 2 officers went inside. Before Price left, he spoke with the 2 police officers briefly to see if they were okay, and then he headed back to Old Scotland Yard to report to his superiors. It was almost 8 o'clock in the evening when Price returned to the yard. He went to report immediately. He hardly waited after knocking on his superintendent's door. He just opened it before anyone could have answered. After hearing him, the superintendent granted Price some assistance with the protection of Nicol and Jason and the investigation. He became the case's lead detective, and another detective was ordered to join the investigation, Detective Edward Hawkins, a man in his mid-40s with a bit of a belly who wasn't worried about getting higher on the ladder. He simply loved solving cases and putting criminals behind bars. He just closed a murder case with an arrest and conviction, it was a territorial conflict between two gangs in Tottenham, and as a result, one of the gang's leaders got shot by a hired gun. The case wasn't a riddle, but finding the shooter was different. The main suspect was a man well known by the police, Jamal Clarence, aka Striker. He was a gangland hitman whom witnesses identified. After some field interviews, Detective Hawkins discovered the suspect's favourite takeaway restaurant and gave it a shot. He decided to watch the place, and the guy turned up. He even had the murder weapon on him when he got arrested. Besides the fact that Price believed that Nicol's stalker and the serial killer from last year were the same person, he didn't share this with anyone else yet. His new partner was supposed to start his shift the following day, so Price was to do the same. The superintendent suggested that the young detective get some rest, especially when he had seen Price's broken nose. Price knew it was a polite order when his superior suggested something, so he took his boss's advice and drove home to his flat. He was living alone in a one-bedroom flat near Victoria Station. His place was on the first floor. After getting into his house, Price removed his tie and placed it with his bag, an armchair, in his living room. He turned on the TV and went to the kitchen to make an ice bag for his nose, and he also placed some ice in a whiskey glass. He returned to the front room and took out a bottle of scotch from the cabinet next to the TV. He sat down on the sofa, poured himself a drink, kicked off his shoes, and switched the channel on the TV, on his beloved animal documentaries. He pulled out a thick folder from his bag. He placed it on the coffee table before him and took a big sip of his drink before he opened it. It was the file of the serial killer case he had to suspend months ago. This was the last case as a lead detective, and he had to suspend it. However, he never gave up on it. The 4 girls were young and never harmed anyone. Price himself was a few years younger than them. He wanted to serve justice for these women because he thought they didn't deserve to have such a death. A delusional person was murdering them ritually. However, this horrifying madness seemed to show a method behind it. His 4 victims were all the same age and female. They all had the exact date of birth from the year down to the day. Also, they were adopted. Price had his new case file out on the table as well. Nicol had her date of birth matching. Price wasn't sure if she was adopted or not, but his guts told him that her stalker was the killer of the other 4 girls, and he was ready to do anything to stop him this time, before he could kill again. While Price was going to work himself to sleep on his couch, Nicol and Jason were in the bedroom, which they usually used in the country house. Jason's brother Ben had a big family with 4 children, so he had a place of considerable size. It had 6 bedrooms, a large living room, and a good kitchen with a dining area, plus 2 bathrooms, of course, 1 on each floor. Nicol and her husband were trying to get some rest, and they were watching TV to direct their attention from the day they just had. By 10 o'clock, Nicol had fallen asleep, and about half an hour later, Jason nodded off. The 2 policemen were downstairs in the living room. They had to be vigilant because this hose was on the edge of the village. Their back garden was opening into the woods with no fence at all. That night, Nicol had her returning dream. The man approached her at the park bench, just like before. Nicol began to fear it would become a nightmare, but that is not what happened. The man gently took her hand and asked her, "Come with me, my child." And they both stood up and walked away from the bench. They only took a few steps when Nicol found herself in an infinite bright, warm light surrounding her. She couldn't see the man anymore, yet she felt his presence. Suddenly, Nicol heard the man's voice as he asked, "Are you ready to accept the honour, my child?" Nicol somehow felt that this man was trying to help, so without really understanding the real meaning of the question, she said, "Yes, I am." But when she spoke, the words she was saying weren't in English. It was a language she had never spoken before. However, now she was talking fluently. Nicol felt like a seed of life spread around her body from her belly, transferring waves of joy and promise of happiness. She indulged in this energy, taking over her body, when she felt an invisible force suddenly grab her. Around 11:30, Jason woke up to something strange. Nicol was standing motionless at the end of the bed facing him. Her eyes were closed, and she kept mumbling something in a monotone voice. It came to Jason straight away. His wife was sleepwalking. He didn't know what to do, since this had never happened before. Jason was shocked for a second, but he quickly concluded that he had to wake up Nicol before she hurt herself. Jason slowly got out of bed and started quietly calling his wife in an attempt to wake her. "Babe, are you okay? Hey, wake up, babe. It's me." He was getting closer to her, slowly taking one step after another. He stood next to Nicol, and now he heard what she was repeating. "Dwthait, tolam, honorem." Jason tried to gently place his arms around Nicol to protect her from falling or harming herself when she snapped out of her dream. When Jason's hands touched Nicol, she let out a long, blood-curdling scream so powerful that Jason felt her whole body shaking. Her eyes opened up, and she looked at Jason, confused for a second before it came back to her where she was and what was happening. Then she hugged her husband in tears. After all this had happened in seconds, the two policemen stormed into the room. They halted when they turned on the lights and saw Nicol and Jason standing in the middle of the room. "Is everyone okay?" one of them asked in a slightly annoyed manner. "Yes, sir," Jason responded. "My wife had a nightmare." The other officer sensed the tension between Jason and his partner and got involved in the conversation to de-escalate the situation. "That is understandable given the circumstances," the police officer said to Jason, then turned to his partner. "Come on, mate, let's get back downstairs." The two police officers left the room, and Jason turned his attention to Nicol. She was still crying, so he started to calm her down. "It's okay, babe. It was only a dream. Let's get back to bed." "Okay," she answered, still sobbing. They lay down on the bed, and Jason waited patiently for his wife to fall asleep again in his arms. Long hours went by before Jason himself dozed off as well. The thought that his wife was in danger and he couldn't do anything to make it go away tortured his mind all along. He was the husband who always came up with a solution, but now this thing was out of his hands. He never wanted to rely on others' help.
Hello there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in again. I hope you enjoyed the story so far, and if you do so, please leave a like, a comment, and if you haven't done it yet, subscribe to our channel so you will be notified when a new episode is out. On that note, the next one coming next Tuesday. I hope you can wait as long as that. Until then, I wish you all the best. I see you next week.